That's fine.
All right. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming. I'm San Diego Mayor Todd Gloria. I'm pleased to be joined today by City Council President Sean Elo Rivera, City Council Member Chris Cate, the city's Chief Operating Officer Jay Goldstone, and Penny Moss, the Director of our Department of Real Estate and Airport Management. For the past 18 months, the city has been negotiating a potential settlement with the owner and lender of 101 Ash Street and Civic Center Plaza. These mediation sessions were aided by the counsel of Judge Jan Adler, a retired federal magistrate, who provided objective legal guidance and worked to ensure constructive discussions. The city was represented in these discussions by outside counsel Dick Sumergian of the Schwartz Sumergian law firm, and throughout the process, our negotiating team was led by our Chief Operating Officer Jay Goldstone, and we received feedback and direction from the City Council and I as to the terms and positioning of our team. This process has been well informed, highly deliberative, and at its core, designed to minimize risks to taxpayers. The city team was also very mindful of the purpose of these transactions in the first place, the needs of our workforce, some of whom work in substandard office space and have endured significant disruption as a result of what has transpired over the past several years. I want to say right at the outset that there is no perfect outcome. No matter how much patience or money we bring to bear, the circumstances we face offer no possibility of an ideal outcome or clean exit from this situation. And that's why our aim has been to reach a lawful, fair agreement that provides certainty as to the costs and obligations of each party, and one that leaves the city with the best hope of addressing our real estate needs here in the downtown core, where we house the vast majority of our workforce and is in the best interest of taxpayers. Today, we are here to announce the City of San Diego has reached a proposed settlement with Sistera and its lender, CGA. Under the proposed settlement, the city will take ownership of both Civic Center Plaza and 101 Ash Street in a transaction that will completely remove Sistera and CGA. The City Council will convene a public hearing and vote on this proposed settlement on Monday, June 27th. That said, as mayor, it is of paramount importance to me that we share with the members of the media and the public the details of this proposed settlement in advance of this public meeting. I'm going to ask our Chief Operating Officer, Jay Goldstone, to go over the terms of this agreement in just a moment. But before he does, I want to make one thing perfectly clear. Nothing in this proposed settlement absolves anyone from potential criminal prosecution, not Jason Hughes, nor anyone who may hold criminal liability as a part of this transaction and its aftermath. The justice system will be able to carry out its duties unimpeded by this settlement, and they should. With that said, I'd bring up our city's Chief Operating Officer, Jay Goldstone. Jay.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to take a few minutes to run through a high-level details of the settlement. The negotiations to reach this, as the mayor said, took 18 months. And as with any negotiations, everybody who was part of the settlement had to give something. If we can go to the first slide. From a Sistera standpoint, they have agreed to return the profits it made from the 101 Ash transaction. This amounts to about $7.4 million. In addition, title to both 101 Ash and Civic Center Plaza will be transferred to the city. Sistera will retain the profits it earned on the Civic Center Plaza, or CCP, transaction, which amounts to about $6.2 million. CGA has agreed to waive a yield maintenance fee that would otherwise be entitled to under the current lease agreement. A yield maintenance fee is basically a prepayment penalty, which is a common feature on taxable financings. The value of this waiver to the city is approximately $11.7 million and would have precluded the city from reaching an agreement had CGA not agreed to this. Also, the city will restructure the financing of both acquisitions, either with cash or tax-exempt financing. This refinancing will save the city approximately $3 million in interest expense over the remaining term of the existing lease. Next slide. Besides paying off both leases, the city will assume responsibility for the remediation of 101 Ash and will be entitled to any and all insurance or third-party reimbursements. The city will now also have the flexibility to determine the future development of nearly 6 square blocks around 101 Ash and the Civic Core, which includes Cobb, CCP, the Parkade, Civic Theater, etc. We will not potentially, and also will preclude the need to perhaps relocate over 800 city employees that currently work in CCP. Next slide. And finally, as the mayor previously mentioned, this settlement agreement does not include Jason Hughes, who acted as a volunteer broker for the city and yet earned nearly $9.5 million on both transactions. Both the city attorney and the district attorney are free to pursue any available legal remedies against Jason Hughes under this agreement. With that, I'd like to turn it back to the mayor.
Thank you, Jay. Now, with respect to why we're pursuing a settlement, that's a fair question. And I want to share a bit on how we arrived at the end of the day to this decision. Basically, it's a business decision. As someone who served on the city council when 101 Ash Street was acquired, it was brought forward and voted on this item, I continue to feel deceived by what was presented to me at that time. We relied on information that was provided by the mayor's office and the real estate assets department, information that we now know was either incomplete or deliberately false. They misrepresented the condition of the building, the extent of which the due diligence was performed, and the need to do a lease-to-own transaction versus an outright purchase. Not to mention, none of us knew on the council at the time that Jason Hughes was being paid by the other party in the transaction and was working to push a deal that was not in the city's best interest. The ways in which the prior administration failed the public on this and many other real estate deals is now well known, and it is infuriating. But the question before us is not whether this was a rotten deal, but what we can do about it now. We must put anger aside and look at this rationally, assess the risks, and try and find a path forward with the least downside for the city and its taxpayers. We have looked at the strength of our legal case and what the best and worst case potential outcomes are, win or lose. We've asked ourselves if there was a way to get close to the best outcome in a court victory without the extremely high risk, intolerable risk, frankly, of going to court and seeing through 5 to 10 years of litigation. So, what might happen if we lose? Well, let's speak truth to this situation. First, we'd be on the hook to pay all of the rent that we've been withholding while we deal with this litigation. And we'd still have a contract obligating us to the terms of the lease-to-own deal. We would have to pay the attorney's fees of Sistera and CGA, which are already in the millions of dollars. And let's not forget that we'd continue to be racking up our own attorney's fees as well. And we would have a building that needs somewhere between $20 and $115 million worth of remediation. Now, let's look at our best case scenario for the continued pursuit of this litigation. If we were to win the lawsuit, the likely outcome is that we'd return 101 Ash back to Sistera, but likely still be forced to pay for them for the remediation for what the city's contractors did during the building's renovations in 2019. We'd also have to turn over CCP, which would mean finding space for the over 800 employees housed there. Either that, or we'd have to do another lease with Sistera. As I mentioned, the likely timeline on these lawsuits and appeals are somewhere between 5 to 10 years, meaning that for up to a decade, we cannot feasibly move forward to address the potential solutions for the many challenges facing our Civic Center. And that's our reality. Now, I know there will be some who will suggest to the public that we should litigate this case to the bitter end. But the question really is the potential upside of an unlikely total legal victory worth years of legal uncertainty, of spending potentially millions of taxpayer dollars in legal fees, and leaving our workers in substandard conditions? I do not believe that this scenario is in the best interest of taxpayers. It is a gamble. And a majority of the City Council and I believe that the prior administration took too many risks with your money. I'd be remiss if I didn't add that under my administration, we have made numerous changes to put safeguards in place to ensure a debacle like this does not happen again. Across our operations, we've hired smart, skilled leadership to help run the city. And one of my key hires was the tough as nails Penny Moss as Director of Department of Real Estate and Airport Management. Penny and her team have overhauled the department's acquisition and management processes. My administration has fully embraced, implemented, and are in the process of implementing all of the recommendation from our independent city auditor's report, which detailed the serious deficiencies of the last administration with regard to real estate. In closing, I would like to recognize that the political move here would be to simply push this problem off to the next administration. But that's not what I promised San Diegans I would do when I ran for this office. I said that I would solve problems facing our city and that I would leave it much better than I found it. We're here today because people put their personal political interests ahead of the people's interests. And we will not do that. We will put the needs of this city and its residents first, and that's what this proposed settlement does. We are approaching this deal with the diligence, integrity, and care that San Diegans should be able to expect from their leaders. And with those comments, I'm now turning the podium over to Councilmember Kate, who has a few words to say. Councilmember?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good afternoon. It is time to put this bad deal behind us. Over the course of the past year, I've had the opportunity to work closely with city leadership as well as our attorneys as part of the team working toward closure and resolution of this terrible deal. I am grateful we have gotten to this day, and I am thankful for the hard work everyone has taken the time to review the facts and findings of several reports and audits that have evaluated the actions of the city and all involved individuals. We have accepted the recommendations that have resulted from this thorough scrutiny, and we are taking those lessons learned to move forward today to provide certainty for the taxpayers of San Diego. Make no mistake, we have already seen evidence of a bad actor who appears to have deceived the council and the past administration. This settlement will not preclude any investigations or prosecutions of any criminal actions that may be found in the course of this deal. And it is my sincere desire to see anyone who has engaged in that type of behavior to be brought to justice. With a settlement agreement on the table, we need to move on. Our taxpayers do not deserve to be on the hook for ever increasing legal costs that are not likely to result in a better deal. The settlement before the council is a fair one and will allow the city to focus on the rest of the challenges and opportunities in front of us. Today, we'll close this chapter and look to how we can work together to provide safe and supportive facilities for our workers while also addressing the big issues of the day. Housing, homelessness, infrastructure, and public safety have never been more important, and we owe it to our communities to continue to fight for them. It's now my pleasure to introduce our Council President, Sean Elo Rivera.
Thank you, Councilmember Kate. Again, my name is Sean Elo Rivera, proud to serve as Council President. When I was running for office, one of my primary goals was to reestablish trust between the city and our people. San Diegans need and deserve a government that will act in the best interest of its residents and a government that is responsible with taxpayer dollars. Repeatedly, prior to being in elected office and when I was working with community, I saw and heard instances that made it difficult for community members to believe that the basics of government would be done right and well. Never mind the loftier, more aspirational goals that we strive for. I wholeheartedly believe government can and should affirmatively improve our community. However, every act of incompetence and every instance of dishonesty doesn't just provide fodder to the cynics and skeptics, it erodes the trust of those who so very much want to believe that their government can work well for them. That's why the 101 Ash saga has been a civic tragedy and should infuriate every San Diegan. Lying millionaires and an incompetent previous administration put our city in a terrible position that has cost San Diego years of progress, millions of dollars, and eroded public trust. We must rebuild that trust. That means leveling with the community, even when doing so is tough. As we all know, our most important decisions rarely offer us to choose between a very clear positive and a very clear negative. What is far more common is being forced to choose between various options, with none being ideal. This is one of those instances. The proposed settlement the council will consider next week, while not ideal, is, in my opinion, the best business option for the city. However we feel about this, however angry it makes us, we have to stay focused on what's most important for the city. We will gain the certainty we need to gain stability for our employees and our finances. There is no guarantee that if we enter into a prolonged lawsuit that we will get the result we want, even if we continue with investigations and depositions for a year or 2 years. The past year and a half in office has shown me numerous examples of the risk the city faces when we are depending on a positive outcome in court. Just this year, 2 popular voter-approved initiatives have been stalled by judges, and there has been recent coverage of nearly $4 million in damages a jury awarded in a single lawsuit against the city. Litigation is very risky for the city. That risk has been increased exponentially by the reckless behavior of former Mayor Faulkner and his administration as they've taken turns throwing one another under the bus for who's responsible, all the while putting their self-preservation above the best interests of San Diego. Instead of spending hours and hours of meetings, negotiations, and legal fees, we must choose a path where we are investing time, energy, and money in our youth and other critical needs for our city. This proposed settlement can provide us with stability. Stability for our city employees, stability in our finances. We need to spend more of our money, time, and energy fixing our roads, funding homeless services, building housing, or hiring people to serve the residents of San Diego. With that stability, we will be able to move forward with transparency to ensure lessons are not forgotten, all while maintaining the opportunity for accountability for any crimes committed against the city. On the issue of moving forward, I want to make something clear. This is certainly an opportunity for the city to turn the page on an ugly chapter in its history. Often, turning the page can imply a desire to move on and forget. I very much do not mean it in that way. We must learn from this debacle. That means incorporating the recommendations from the city's independent auditor, many of which we've done. That means through my role as council president, continuing to advocate for measures to ensure that this council and councils in the future are not led astray by irresponsible mayoral administrations, as Mayor Gloria and Councilmember Kate were back in 2016. That means not allowing former City Attorney Jan Goldsmith to somehow skate by the criticism and backseat lawyering that has somehow only been reserved for San Diego's first Latina city attorney. Mr. Goldsmith should not be given a pass as this chapter of San Diego history ends. And this means providing the absolute maximum level of transparency with respect to 101 Ash. Along those lines, that turning the page in a positive way means full accountability from the justice system for anybody who violated the law in the pursuit or execution of this agreement. The proposed settlement leaves all of that on the table, and it will be incumbent upon me, my colleagues, and our successors to ensure we turn the page with a 100% commitment to learn the lessons from what has been written. With that, I will turn it back to the mayor.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you, Councilmember Kate, Mr. Goldstone, Ms. Moss. Happy to take questions. Ms. Halberstadt.
So how much does the city now owe on CCP and 101 Ash, and where is the money coming from?
I'll turn that over to Mr. Goldstone.
The outstanding principal balance with the back payments that are due and penalties is about $132 million for both buildings combined.
Break it down from each one.
For 101 Ash, it's almost $86 million. And for Civic Center Plaza, it's about $46 million. And the money's going to come from a combination of cash. We are going to pay cash to acquire 101 Ash. And we will use commercial paper and ultimately bonds to acquire Civic Center Plaza.
In addition to the cost of acquiring it, you mentioned that you would pay for the remediation. I've seen estimates of over $100 million to make that really workable. Do you have a number that you're working with, what it really takes to get that building right, to be able to move staff back in?
I might ask Jay or Penny to do some more on that, but I want to be clear. We continue and will continue to pursue claims against the city's contractors for whom we believe are responsible for the condition that the building is currently in. This settlement agreement does not resolve that matter. We will continue to pursue it with vigor, but we can now pursue that, assuming this is adopted next Monday, because we'll own the building. We'll be able to focus our legal attention on that particular part of the litigation, and we will, I believe, successful in pulling back dollars that will help us to pay for the remediation to allow us to.
I was going to pay for it. Do you have a dollar amount you're working with, what it would take to make that building work? Is it 20 million, 50 million, 100 million? Do you have that number?
So that range that you're referring to, that I've mentioned, that others here have mentioned, come from reports of the city, independent reports that the city commissioned. Those reports provide a range of options that we've mentioned, 20 to 115 million. Please allow me to finish. Okay. That there is a modest effort to encapsulate asbestos to a full-scale reimagining, a repositioning of the building. That will now be a question that we can answer with specificity because we'll have title to the building. It was difficult to do that when we didn't own it. Now, again, presuming this transaction is completed, we'll have that and we'll move forward. I do believe that there's a future for that building, but we'll be doing the work going forward. That's work that's been encumbered by the current litigation. And I don't know if Jay or Penny have anything they want to add to that.
The reason I ask that is you've seen that the city originally had an appraisal. You can argue how much, $67 million, $70 million, right? The building was later refinanced at $91 the city willing to put in more than the building is worth?
I think the answer I've already provided you is sufficient. I mean, we will have the opportunity to actually consider that now. I mean, folks have suggested exactly what you're getting at, but we don't own the building. And so the current owner would have to answer that question. We can take possession of this, and as I think Jay has mentioned in a previous city council hearing, this was done months ago in public. I believe it was well covered by all of the media that is present here today, of the range of options that are available when you consider a redevelopment of this area. And so, I think some of those questions we have notions about, but we have to do some more specificity toward that we couldn't do if we're continuing to litigate who actually owns the building. And Jay, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
The only thing I would add is the potential liability to remediate the building, whether it's $20 million or over $100 million, almost pretty much rests with the city whether we own the building or not. So if we don't settle and we sort of win the litigation and the building goes back to Sistera, that $20 million to $100 million would still be a liability that the city may have to pay. We'd rather own the building and make those business decisions.
Who else?
You've said for months and probably more than a year that the chief concern is protecting taxpayers and recovering money that was wrongly expended. How's this deal come anywhere close to protecting taxpayers?
Well, and first off, we return the profit, or Sistera returns the profit.
Just so I'm clear, you're going to pay these guys $130 million, right?
We'll have property, we'll have 2 downtown buildings that we will now own, which was our original intent when purchasing the buildings.
The building is valued at $67 million. How is this deal protecting taxpayers as you put forward for more than a year?
We will be receiving the profits from the transaction back from Sistera on this deal. As Mr. Goldstone laid out, there are a number of terms in this settlement agreement that amounts to 15 plus million in value and savings back to the city. We get ownership of 2 blocks, essentially, of downtown San Diego. We get the opportunity to stop spending money on attorneys for this particular piece of litigation and the risk of paying the other side's attorney's fees. And we have the opportunity to try and reposition this property down here, which you can look around and see we have challenges with.
You guys have said for more than a year that this deal was fraudulent and that you were deceived. Why are you doing business and buying out a lease that you were deceived about and it was fraudulent?
Well, this deal allows us to stop the relationship with CGA and Sistera
By paying them $130 million.
by concluding this arrangement, receiving the assets, stopping the liability. I mean, at the end of the day, and you have well covered this, a lot has come out through litigation to date. And I think we look at the situation. The council president spoke to the uncertainties and risk of litigation. We are going to cease a business relationship with these entities. We are going to have asset ownership of those assets, and we'll have the opportunity to reposition them. Remember, and I think it's overlooked in a lot of the discussion of this issue, the existing buildings that we own, the one you're currently sitting in, the one I would welcome you to check out across the street, and others in our city portfolio are also tremendous risks to taxpayers. We know that. But the inability to come to a conclusion on this matter is limiting our ability to address this larger risk that we face. Yes, those deals, as you've heard from everyone up here, are a civic tragedy, a debacle. There are any number of terms that have been used today. The challenge of our entire situation down here is larger than that. And we understand that, and we're in a current position where we're not able to do much about it unless we're able to come to some certainty, which is what we're doing.
The risk of litigation is no different today than it was a year and a half ago when the lawsuit was filed. We're months away from trial. Why settle months outside of trial?
Well, I think
I mean, the city attorney's obviously put forward a case that this has been fraudulent from the get-go and it's voided, the contracts are voided, they're not really liable for any damages. And you're standing before the city today saying we're going to pay $130 million to make this go away and keep buildings, one of which can't be used.
so. I think we have seen many times, as has been mentioned by others, that litigation is extremely risky and is very expensive. That's just the nature of litigation. I think it's also true that as time has gone on, we have learned more, and I think this proposed settlement is the most prudent course of action for the city and its taxpayers. So we that's where we're at. And I think Jay, why don't, if you do me the favor of repeating the sort of if you win, lose component of all this. I think that needs to apparently be reemphasized.
Sure. The numbers I gave you obviously are the balances due of the original transactions that were negotiated. So we're not paying any more than we would have otherwise have owned. You know, the scenario we ran through is one if we win the case, one if we lose the case. First of all, we're talking easily about a 5-year or so or greater process through litigation, because no matter who wins or loses in round one, there'll be an appeal, and maybe another appeal up to the state Supreme Court, and maybe remanded back to the lower courts. So we got time is one big issue. The issue is if we lose the case, then obviously we're in the same position where we are right now. We'd have to continue, the leases would be honored. We'd have to continue making the payments, pay back payments that we've withheld since September of 2020. And as the mayor mentioned, we'd be liable most likely for legal fees of Sistera and CGA. So that's somewhat if we lose. But if we win and we try to analyze that, that would potentially mean that the leases are void. The question is, that could we claw back payments that we've paid? No certainty on that. Some believe that that's a done deal, but we don't know what the courts would do. This is sort of a unique kind of case, 1090. So could we claw back payments? We don't know. But if both leases were deemed invalid because of the 1090 violation, we would no longer own CCP and potentially would have to vacate CCP, where we have over 800 employees in there. We could try to renegotiate a lease with Sistera or a purchase at then market rates, but we figure that that's a risk we don't want to take. The other thing is, as I mentioned, we'd still be on the hook for some level of remediation as it relates to 101 Ash, because it was city contractors that went in there and contaminated the building, caused the damage that was done. And so we wouldn't own 101 Ash, but we'd have to go in there and spend money on it, taxpayers' money on it. We feel it would be more prudent for us to own the building and make some longer-term business decisions moving forward, what to do with that building.
You provided details on the top line. Are you providing a copy of the settlement?
Yes, that'll be part, not today, but that'll be part of the agenda packet that will be released probably Thursday morning with a staff report and a lot of backup materials will be released this week in advance of next Monday's council meeting.
I have a question to both you and the mayor then. Under the Brown Act, as soon as the other side accepts the proposal that was voted on in closed session, under the Brown Act, if somebody asks for it, which I did starting Wednesday last week, you have to provide a copy. I've been asking for it since Wednesday. Obviously, you wouldn't be proposing it here if the other side hadn't already accepted it. Under the Brown Act, you're supposed to give us a copy. Are you guys exempt from the Brown Act?
No, but we just got it signed.
Right. I'd refer you to the city attorney.
I have the email that they gave me Friday said it's unlawful to respond to my email. But this is the game that they've been playing with us for 2 years. We ask for documents and then have to sue to enforce the Brown Act of the California Public Records Act. And these are public documents. We have a right to the documents. And as soon as the other side accepted it, you shall, under the Brown Act, give a copy. Now, I've been requesting since Wednesday. I'd like to get a copy.
I'd also, I think all of us would like to get more detailed information, but I do have a question to clarify on the lawsuit. So Jason Hughes is also part of the city's lawsuits. Obviously Sistera and the lenders were not the only parties. So what happens to that piece of the 2 lawsuits?
Jason Hughes and Hughes Marino continue to be a subject of litigation.
Okay, on the city's 1090 civil case.
We will continue to pursue litigation against Mr. Hughes and Hughes Marino. All right.
The settlements only regard Sistera and 101 Ash LLC.
As noted in the slideshow presentation, yes. This pertains to Sistera and CGA. This does not include Mr. Hughes, Hughes Marino, or the contractors that we want to hold accountable.
Affected by this, if at all?
Well, that's a question for the city attorney. All right. Thank you all for being here today. And we will get you more information, but as soon as we could share something, we want to be able to share it today.